Hey everyone, so I'm going to be talking about content delivery networks and how to integrate them with Sitecore. Now there's quite a few ways of integrating different content delivery networks with Sitecore, and there's quite a few different nuances, and we'll take a look through how or why we want to do this, how we can do it, and I'll also show you a bit of a demo on some on a project I've been working on recently where we had to deal with a specific case of very, very large files. So, quick little bit about me. Cameron Straman. I'm a freelance Sitecore consultant and MVP for the past 4 years. And I'm currently working for Arm, who are the makers of, they design chips. And, you may remember me from such online activities as my blog post, and most people know me by my Twitter handle and mistakenly confuse me with Kansar. So I'm not the unicorn guy. So why would you want to use a content delivery network? Well, we basically want to make our sites fast. We want to reduce the amount of requests we have coming into our CD servers. And really, when we want to offload that onto a different type of system, somewhere else, we don't care, not onto our Sitecore servers. We also want to serve the files much closer to where the user is actually located, reduce our latency times. And maybe we have very, very large files. We don't want to be putting that into Sitecore. It's possibly not the best place to be putting that kind of thing into a database. Maybe we have videos that we're using on our site. We don't want to host them on YouTube for some reason, And there's also another added benefit of increasing browser connection limits. There's a bit more information on this slightly later. Why? Because you don't want users to come in to your site and getting very, very confused and very, very frustrated. You want a rapid delivery. So typically, users will come in from all over the world, and you're serving the files from one location. You may have gone down and done some other stuff with Sitecore to move the CD servers closer, but you're just increasing the amount of Sitecore servers that you have and the licenses and that kind of thing. So really, what you want to be doing is serving it from wherever the user is closest to. Just reduce those trips. And trying to figure out where those users are located and where that traffic is coming from, it gets a bit messy sometimes with global sites. You end up with some traffic from here at this time of day and some traffic from there at that time of day, and it ends up a bit nasty. And then trying to figure all this out can end up a bit crazy, and it looks a bit more like abstract art that you're trying to figure out these graphs of where these traffic spikes are, and how do we solve this? So you need a better way of solving this, and what you really want to avoid is having a massive fail whale on your site because users have come on and they've overloaded the site and you don't have enough Sitecore licenses again. So I've been looking at content delivery networks for Sitecore for the past several months because we had some very, very specific needs, and generally I found it quite an interesting subject, and so the more I looked into it, the more ways I found of actually using content delivery network with Sitecore. Some are much easier, as you'll see, and some require just a little bit more thought, and some, if we combine a few of these, we can get some nice additional benefits in increasing browser speeds and stuff. So by far the easiest way of doing this is by using edge caching. So there's a few companies that do this. Someone like Akamai is probably one that you've heard of. Cloudflare, they're fairly famous for their DDoS protection system that they have in place. And the way it works is the requests are cached by whichever provider you're using. So it's Akamai or Cloudflare. And what they'll do is it acts as a reverse proxy. So you make a request via Akamai, and it will then request that file from your CD server. So it pulls it in from the origin as and when required. And companies like Akamai, they have lots of servers all over the world, so you don't have to worry about scaling this stuff out and pushing it to specific regions and whatever else. You just literally just point your DNS to them, set up some configurations and say, I want everything under dash media in cached, and off it goes, and it does some magic. So literally just user comes in, makes a request, it's not in the cache, it goes and requests it from your origin server, and magic. Typical request would normally be like this: user will come and request directly, and you just hand it over to Akamai, and off it goes, and you don't have to worry about anything else. There's a couple of settings you need to change just in Sitecore to set the media cacheability, but apart from that, it's pretty straightforward. So we ran some tests on our site. It was just a bit of a sample test, so it wasn't the full site, but we had Akamai run some tests, and this is the results of that test. So the blue graph is homepage load time using just normal out-of-the-box Sitecore, and the orange graph is having run some trials using Akamai as the edge cache. As you can see, majority of those requests, I think we had about 65% or so, were loaded within 3 seconds versus the normal graph, as you can see, skews a lot higher. The other advantage was, obviously, the whole point of this was content delivery network, so it's geolocated. Now, the company we're working for, it has a very big global presence, so we are doing the development in UK. Our stuff is hosted in Azure, but our customers are all over the world, particularly with the emerging markets like China and the Far East. We have a lot of traffic coming from those areas. So as you can see, every single location was faster using Akamai's service than just hosting it straight out of Sitecore, even with Sitecore's media caching onto disk and that kind of thing. Now, there are a number of third-party DAM connectors, digital asset management connectors, available for Sitecore. I haven't really used these. I've seen the demos and things, but they sponsored Symposium a couple of years back in Barcelona. Adam Software sponsored Symposium a couple of years back, and there's a few others that are around. DigiSuite, for example, PicturePark seems to have a nice integration with Sitecore. And then there's a couple of Brightcove and Uyala connectors, but they're just mainly for videos rather than everything. The nice things with these is this direct integration into the media library, and I have a couple of screenshots I'll show you. They are fully featured. It's not just about managing media for CDN. They have a lot more things happening in the background, including your whole digital asset management workflowing offline with other tools that are not in Sitecore. So there are some other things that you may find useful. I think it's going to really depend on your project and your customers and your clients and stuff. So this is the DAM connector. This is PicturePark, and they just have a section in the media library, and it syncs up with their servers. You can drop files into whatever their CDN is, and it will do two-way syncs and that kind of thing. And then within the rich text editor, you can just normally select these images and things. The DigiSuite one seems to have had a bit of a remodel, and it's all speakified, but they essentially do pretty much the same thing. So one of the things that I looked at was faking it, basically. We're trying to increase some of the browser connections, and you can actually create a fake CDN, essentially. And this is useful in a number of ways. And It increases your connection pool, your browser connection pool, which helps with loading the site up on the front end. And it's useful because it can be used with edge caching without having to hand over your entire domain to, say, Akamai. You could set up a media.mysite.com and great, you can just hand that bit over to Akamai and not worry about the rest of the stuff. You can push this straight back into Sitecore itself just by setting up another site. It is a fake CDN, so you won't get any of the additional cache benefits if you just do this alone without using an actual CDN. And because you have many more requests coming into your site at the same time, because you increase the connection pool, that's going to have more load. That's going to put more load onto your server at any given time. Now, the browser connection limits, I keep mentioning this, and the reason this is important at the moment is each browser has a maximum number of connections they will open up at any given time. So weirdly, Chrome is lagging on this front to 6, and IE 11 has 13, rather strangely. But what this means is when a page loads, the page will load up all the additional resources on that page. So your images, your JavaScript files, or your CSS. CSS includes, and every single thing has to be requested. Now the browser will limit that to only 6 connections, so it can only request 6 things at a time. And then once it's downloaded that thing, it will request another 6, and so on and so forth. Now, what you can do is fake it and then add in another domain. And by doing that, you've effectively increased your browser connection limit to 12. So that will mean that it can download 12 things simultaneously, 6 from each domain. And subdomains count. It's not just a single main domain. Subdomains also count, so that works. The change to this is very simple. Just set it up like another Sitecore site. Add it into the host name, pipe it in, have a wildcard or something, and then just set the media link server URL to wherever your domain is, and set the always include to true. Set it up in IIS, and you're good to go. That's all you need to do. Now, when Sitecore renders out the images, it will include that URL for all the images, and your internal links will just stay as normal with a slash wherever that path is. You can use a protocol-less URL, as I've done up here, which means that if you're running over HTTP or HTTPS, it's fine. You will just use whatever the relative one is. Probably should at this point just use HTTPS for everything. Probably more so with Microsoft's support of HTTP2 when it comes out in Windows 2016 as well. So, Azure. I know there's a big debate with Azure versus AWS, but Azure finally has support for custom origin support, custom origins. It took them maybe 3 years behind Amazon, but it's finally there. So it's we'll live with that. So what this means is, before, when you used the CDN and in Azure, it would only work with certain services. So if you were running your traditional virtual machines, you couldn't use a CDN. You had to use some hacks to do it. The only way you could do it is if you use web roles, but I don't know too many people using web roles for deploying that at Sitecore sites, and it wasn't very good. So it's pretty simple to set up. All you got to do is just get into Azure, create an endpoint, and set up a name, whatever you want to call it, and set up your host name, which is what your CD server is, the actual your Sitecore origin, and then just set up the protocols, HTTP, HTTPS. When you configure this, there's one setting which is very important, which is cache every unique URL. And the reason you want to set this up is so when you request a resized image, it will cache the resized image and not just one image for all of them. So it happens. So, you know, this could, and that's it. That's just one setting there. So you see I've got it set up. You can, so I've got it set up here with a Azure out-of-the-box URL. You can add a custom domain name. So if you wanted to go add a subdomain on your own site and then loop that back, that will work. And surprisingly, the settings are pretty much the same as the last one I showed you. Just set the media link server URL and then tell it to always include the server URL and set the cacheability to public. Otherwise, the CDN will not cache the media because by default, Sitecore sets it to private. So one thing to be careful with when you're caching your assets is content expiration. By default, Azure will cache for 7 days. So it depends on how often your media is changing, really. If 7 days is fine, then you're good to go, but more than likely it's not going to work. You're using a content management system, so things are changing all the time. That's the whole point of having a content management system. As I said, make sure you've enabled caching by URL parameters and suggest you override the link manager to append an updated date or a revision grid so that if your image does change, you don't need to then go. So it is possible to go flush the entire cache via REST API, but you're blowing out your entire CDN cache. It's going to have to refetch it. So override the link manager, just append in the updated date, or there's a revision grid which gets reset every time you make a change to any Sitecore item. Just append that in, and it will then use the URL parameters of this date and revision grid, and everything will nicely cache. And make sure you're using the new Azure portal. I say it's new; it's been out for about almost 2 years, but everyone's being forced over to it now, and then all of a sudden the UI is too complicated for all of us. But make sure it's not too bad. Make sure you use the new portal. Otherwise, you won't get this custom origin support. If you create it with the old portal, it will create it on some old service, and Azure's always updating. So this is one of the new features I added in. So the media link provider, it's very, very simple. Just override it, get the regular URL, and then append in the revision date or the modified date, the modified field. So nothing too clever going on, and just continue working on. So one of the main reasons I started looking at this, all the CDNs and providers and things, was we actually had a very specific requirement on the project I'm currently working at. So ARM, being the company that they are and the kind of things they design and develop, we have a lot of large downloads. So these are developer files, SDKs, software downloads, and these had been sitting in various locations, and they were becoming quite hard to manage. And you've got to have it over here, and then you copy and paste a link, and then you've got to paste it into there. And since we moved over to Sitecore, we wanted to provide them with this same user experience that they're used to. They want to link to a file, just click open, opens a media library, set the file that you want to link to, job done. The problem, of course, is these are pretty large files. These are 1 to 2 gigabytes, for some of these files, and we've got 30, 40, 50 of these files. And for some reason, blob storage in SQL database is probably not a good place to be putting this stuff in. And on top of that, we've also got all these customers all over the world downloading this stuff. So using a traditional CDN like Akamai was not a really good idea, because Akamai would still have to request those files from us and be doing that every 7 days or whatever it was, even if it's just for that initial time. So I looked at a few of these connectors and stuff, but ended up just writing something myself, which actually worked out quite well. And what we needed to do was put this files into Azure. So we just use Azure API. It's a fairly simple API actually. There's not a lot going on in that API, and we just hacked into some of these Sitecore pipelines. So, for example, the UI upload and attach, and then we trigger some additional code to actually just push that into Azure. We also needed to make sure that the job was not blocking the UI, because you don't want to be pushing it directly into Azure and the user's just hanging and it's complaining and they can't do nothing. So we've added some tasks in to get around that. And the way we did this was to intercept the media requests as well on the incoming, when the media requests are requested again. We intercept the media request, then decide what to do with it, whether to put it into Azure or actually it's an internal thing. And there was a couple of other bits of code that we had to do with a link manager. And so the most important thing was it had to support the content editor and, more importantly, the experience editor. So I'll go through a quick bit of a code demo. So the integration here is pretty straightforward. You just go into Sitecore as you normally would, and you just click upload, select whatever files you want to select, and that's it. And that's all you have to do with this particular bit of code that I've written. And we run a few other pipelines here where we calculate the file hash, because again, these are software downloads, and we want to display this information on the site. And we've been hacking around with this a little bit over the past few weeks to make it a bit nicer. So adding things like these thumbnails, for example, these were not there before. So we would upload a file and it'd just be a default icon, which didn't help too much with the user being able to actually upload, show this stuff, being able to pick an image and preview these items as they added it. So you can see the integration itself is seamless, fairly seamless. It looks like it's all in Sitecore, and the editing experience remains the same. You can just add the images in, and if you reload the page here, you'll see that actually the image has loaded, but it has actually loaded from Azure. And what we've done is we've intercepted the media request, and we've actually redirected it to Azure. And the reason we have done a redirect rather than a direct link to Azure is we still want to capture a user actually clicking those links. So if the request is fed through Sitecore, we can still get all the analytics data behind all those links and that kind of thing. So it works from all the screens. You can just browse in as you would normally and do an upload, and it's all still works. So you can see here, the file is still on disk. It has calculated the file hash, but it hasn't quite uploaded it to the cloud yet. So it's running as a background task. And in a second, you'll see it uploaded. And now if we head on over to CloudBerry Explorer, it's one of the software download. It's a tool that you can download for connecting into Azure. You can see that the files have, the 3 files I just uploaded have been added into Azure, and you add in a few hacks to also delete the files out and stuff when the images are done. But we also added a new media thumbnail cache folder, and as you can see, it just sits alongside the normal media cache folder. And when the images are uploaded, we just create these thumbnails on the fly, and then delete out the files. Now the reason we did this was to not put this into the database, and so the way we got around this was, so added in these integrations, these interception points into Sitecore, and you can see there's a few settings here. You know, the location of your thumbnail folder, whether to always include the URL, the CDN URL, almost like this is the same thing as the media Sitecore's own media link URL. I added in a custom processor, which would then allow me to run a number of distinct steps. So we had one for generating thumbnail, calculating the file hash, uploading it to CDN. So we just start intercepting into Sitecore rather than using the media framework integration, because that was actually very complex. Started looking at that code, and it's a whole data provider in the background. It just seemed a bit easier to start intercepting Sitecore. We do have some settings here, a location setting. So what this will do is it will force anything uploaded to those folder or folders. You can add in multiple. It will force any of those, any files added to those folders to be pushed to Azure storage. So there's a number of other pipelines here. The code is all on GitHub, so it's not particularly important. But again, we just hack into some of these pipelines with deleting, for example, to remove the file from Sitecore and to then also delete it from Azure as well. And we override the media provider to be able to provide distinct URLs. And the code itself, say it's not that much, it's not doing that much. So what we will do here is back a bit. When the media item is uploaded, we just take that item and we start a job, and it runs as a Sitecore job in the background, which means it doesn't block the UI, and it just pushes the files then into Azure. So these tasks, the jobs run as since they're Sitecore jobs, only one job will be running at any given time. So you don't have to worry about concurrency and taking up too many threads and users doing too many things. We plug into a few other areas to generate these thumbnails, which was took a while to figure this out actually, but actually was not too hard in the end. But so when the image is uploaded, we will generate a thumbnail of that image. If we can generate an image, a thumbnail for that media type, we'll generate a thumbnail, keep it on disk. And the reason we do that is so the next time the user comes in, they have those thumbnails on that upload, on that selection screen, which is what Sitecore does. So, you know, let's make it the same. So the upload into the CDN, again, not too much code. You can see it's all wrapped out into helper methods, but quite literally just if it's already been uploaded to Azure before, well, let's delete it first and then upload it and then delete the file from disk. So when we upload it into Sitecore, we upload it as a file. There's no point in, we've uploaded it now to Azure, there's no point in also clogging up our file system. It's never going to get used again. So do a bit of cleanup, update the settings, update the template settings. So I did have to add a couple of fields into into the Sitecore media item templates. Got a bit dirty and just put it into the file template. It probably shouldn't have. Not modifying the default Sitecore template meant quite a lot of other work in updating settings and stuff. This was the lesser of two evils in this instance, I think. So I think I've run through my code too. So I'm going to just rewind it a little bit here. Let me just back up a little bit. So the provider updated this code. Initially, it was very Azure specific. Our requirement was Azure, and that was met months ago. So I have updated this code. So thumbnails is one of the things I added over the past couple of weeks. I also split the provider, the provider out. So it's now using a provider-based model. So it just looks up in config which provider to use, and as long as those implement the interface, that's fine. Here is the configuration for the Azure provider, which is the one that's available on GitHub. So you just need to go in, put in your storage account name, the account key, and the storage container, and you're good to go. If you want to swap it out and use AWS instead, just write another AWS provider, or somebody go and write it into a pull request. I haven't used AWS, so I don't know the API. So it's fairly simple to swap that out and change it out for something else. And the Azure connector, as you can see, it's just uses some Sitecore's configuration factory magic to just injecting the parameters, create an instance, and then just very simple Azure code here just to stream the media into the blob container. And it's an update which actually is just the same as delete. Azure will override if something already exists. And we just need to add a reference to the Azure API NuGet package, which is a Windows Azure storage NuGet package. That's pretty straightforward, as you can see, and same with the delete. And that's the files up into Azure. Very simple. And this is so we also have to update the media provider. And the reason now this requires a modification to the web config, which well, there's no way around it. The media provider is specified in the web config, it's not in the Sitecore section. So we need to hack into the media provider, and the reason we have to do this is for a couple of reasons. The first reason here is the thumbnails. We want to check if it's a request for a thumbnail, and if it is, then make that request locally. Is it a request for a CDN, a media item which has been moved into CDN? If it is, then actually we want to intercept that, and we want to do something else here, and that's something else in our instance is get a media URL and return that instead. It's a lot of these code blocks are pretty straightforward. It was just being able to find out where and how to start hacking into this and how to integrate this kind of thing with Azure and particularly large files. We also override a few of the processes, the media request handler, again for the same reason. If we have a request for a thumbnail, we're gonna set that to be not cacheable, otherwise Sitecore is gonna start going a bit crazy with trying to use its own caches. But we've actually now taken over something else to provide the thumbnails for these videos, for these media items, and this is where we actually do the redirect. So the reason we do use a redirect in our instance is we want to capture the analytics. So there's a few other little bits and pieces there. I'm going to skim through this because they're not of great importance. And bang. So we now have another way of serving up all our media. How do we still want to be using a 1950s style pit stop for serving our customers, or do we want to get a bit more with the modern age and just serve them out and be a bit of a hero? And the code is on GitHub. Code is on GitHub. I have a few blog posts on this as well. The Effect CDN one and the code I've just shown you, it is all on there as well in these blog posts. I'll update them soon, and I'll put up some another post on using Azure as a custom pool origin, and just a few little bits and pieces that I showed you around that as well. We have about 10 or so minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes or 7 minutes.
Okay. I'll leave this up to imprint in your brains, and if anybody has any questions.
Hi, 2 questions. First of all, how would you place a relationship of a CDN and a load balancer? So you said that in the CDN you should point to the CD, but what if we have multiple CDs? Would you rather put one CD there or the load balancer endpoint?
Just put it to the load balancer endpoint and let Sitecore deal with it.
All right. And then the second question is, in Sitecore, if you delete an item which contains an image, then the blob in the database, I think, remains there. So you have this job to clean orphan blobs. Did you address this somehow?
So probably should have shown this on the code earlier. So the way I did it was to actually upload files, upload media as files. So it never actually hits the database. So all it will do is it will store it on disk. And so one of the pipelines I had there was look at these locations. If something is coming in, if something is being uploaded to this location, force it to be uploaded as a file. And I just flick that in the Sitecore pipelines early enough, and you don't have to worry about it. And then the cleanup is just deleted from disk. So because we've just used Sitecore's own media framework, we don't have to do anything. It creates the item for us, and then we have a reference to the image, which we then just hijack in the rest of the link providers and that kind of thing.
Hi. So my question is, when you get a media request to the web server, how do you know which of the media requests you need to get from the local database or which one from CDN? In terms of like, what you want to redirect, and there must be some performance considerations there.
With the redirect, so
I mean, more like you have to distinguish between calls. Yes, I want to cache that information, or
it's not cached. So there is a flag on the media item which tells it that it has been uploaded to CDN. So we just use that flag, and the only thing I'm doing is actually doing a check to say, is it file-based? If the current media item request is file-based or not file-based, just let Sitecore do its thing. If it is file-based, then we'll do a redirect. But you can flick it on between both modes. So if you just wanted the link directly to the Azure blob storage or the CDN endpoint in this instance, because you could put the CDN over the blob, then you can just flick the true-false switch in config, and it will just write out the URL, and there's no redirects involved.
Did you investigate casting HTML on the edge solutions?
No, actually haven't. I think that's probably one that everybody's after. It'd be better if Sitecore makes a few updates. I think Todd's up there, so we might have to hit him up a little bit. So if Sitecore makes a few updates to the caching providers, it might make our life a bit easier on that front. But that's a whole other story.
More questions?
Sorry, I'm too far. So to show those images, media, because this approach be expanded for static files.
Sorry, can you repeat? Sorry.
What I meant is, can you load JavaScript, CSS to CDNs, and improve website loads?
Yeah, you can do. Yeah, you can put everything into a CDN. So with the final solution, it's only looking at the items in the Sitecore media library. But if you're using something like one of the first option I presented, which was using an edge cache, since that's routing all your requests, you can cache everything. So your CSS and your JavaScripts and the Sitecore media items. And one of the previous projects I worked for, actually for a Danish client as it was, we were using Akamai there, where we had just a couple of load balanced CD servers, and they're a very large client with global customer base. It was the media which is always taking up the bandwidth on the servers rather than the actual requests themselves, especially once they've been cached, the HTML cache and stuff.
Any more questions? Okay.
Yeah.
Really? No? Okay.
Great.
Thanks to Cameron.